melodic heavy metal. Playing it heavier, louder, raunchier, faster. 99.1 CJAM. This is the Signals of Intuition.
Hey guys, here's a recent interview I did with Maor Appelbaum, the mastering engineer of a lot of metal records that have come out recently, including stuff from Rob Halford, Dokken, Fates Warning, Sepultura, Yngwie Malmsteen, Armored Saint, Symphonia, Anvil, Nightmare, William Shatner, and many others. The interview has just been lightly edited to fix up a couple little technical glitches and just tighten everything up. And other than that, enjoy. Hey, Maor.
Hey.
All good to go?
Yes.
Awesome. Okay, so I guess let's start from the very beginning, and then we'll sort of dive into the mastering stuff. Your biography says you're Israeli. Were you raised in Israel? What can you tell me about your early life?
I was born in Israel and raised there. Lived there most of my life. Israel is a very technological country. Lots of developments there. Most of the stuff that people are using is really from Israel. A lot of research and development of computers and communications and medical and army and military and musical. A lot of things are developed there. So living there, you are exposed to a lot of technology in all forms. So it was great, living there, and people are very friendly there, and they like to hang, and they like to party, and they like music, and they like to connect with people. So it's a very warm and friendly country and atmosphere. A lot of musicians that come there like it very much. I know from a lot of bands that I worked with that were there, they were really happy going there, and they always remember the place. They liked it very much, and they came back, a lot of them. So growing up there was interesting because we had a lot of music that was local, but the music that came in from other countries, we would have to look for it and find it in special shops, which made us more interested in what's happening in that music, like who's involved, the discography of the band, who produced it, who mixed it, what label it is. So because it wasn't that easy to get a hold of, everything we had was interesting for us to learn about it. So we knew a lot about what we were listening to because it wasn't that market, and everything that came in and we could find was for us unique.
So what you're saying is, like, the local scene there is very, very big, and anything international is sort of really hard to get a hold of.
Well, not really hard today. The internet exists for so many years that everybody's done everybody played catch up with the music, but not every band that was big in America became big in Israel. Not every band penetrated that market because a lot of the music that came to Israel came from Europe and America and other places in the world. So there was certain things that penetrated that market and people got to know of it, and some stuff that was just in the just common knowledge, but not really something that became big there.
Mm-hmm.
So it's not that people don't know the music; they know a lot, but it's not like it was here or in Europe. Everything that came in was in a certain quantity, not a huge quantity, and the fan base was more connected to it because what they could get, they would hold it very close to the heart. It was kind of a connection for them. So if they were a fan of a band, they were big fans of that band, and whatever they could get.
How would you describe, like, the media over there and sort of rock stations and things like that? Is it anything like over here in America, or is it totally different?
It's totally different. Back in the day, there were a few rock programs in radio stations, but it was never like there's a rock station. There was never a classic rock station, or it wasn't dedicated to different types of music. Some radio stations had a variety that went more towards the international music, and some had more local music. Some had specific genres in the Israeli music, but we didn't have just like heavy metal station or classic rock or English pop, or it was a blend of what would come in and what would get into the playlists. So if a band made it big and it got to it, it got played. But if it's not big enough, it wouldn't. And there were a few programs that were more alternative music, and there sometimes you would hear bands that you know of or could get a single played, or even some underground.
Now, how do you get interested in music? Did you grow up with it? Like, do you have brothers and sisters or parents who are always playing it constantly, or what sort of sparked your interest?
I always liked music as a kid. You hear music, you enjoy it, and as I grew up, I wanted to play a musical instrument. In your teenage years, you become a band member. It's kind of a natural progression, and you have a band and you do some shows, and hopefully you get the opportunity to record yourself or go to a studio and make a demo or whatever it is, if it's possible. For us, it wasn't that easy to make a demo back then. We didn't have the money to go in a studio, and then when we had, it was really crappy recordings. I don't think we were good players at the beginning, and also the engineers probably didn't know how to record what we were doing in a way that will complement our non-musical abilities. Or they didn't know the genre that we did, so even if we played it bad, if there's ways to cover it up in a way.
What instruments do you play?
I'm originally a bass player, and but in some of my bands I played a bit of some synthesizers as well, and I did some experimental music, so I've done also a lot of sound manipulation. But I was a good bass player for my age back then, and I didn't really study bass, so I think for what I did then, I was good enough to be in bands, and I was always involved in the music writing, so I probably wrote parts that fit my skill, my technique. So I guess I sounded good enough because it worked. I wrote lines that sounded interesting and worked with the melody and the rhythm, and they sat tight enough, so it felt that I'm doing a good job. But I can't compare myself to accomplished bass players that do this their whole life, or ones that are skilled and they know a lot of theory and have great technique. I was good for what I was doing, good enough for what I was doing, but I can't say I was good enough to be a session musician or a touring musician.
Yeah, fair enough.
I was more a musician for the music I'm involved with writing.
Who were some of your favorite bands growing up early on?
Iron Maiden was a band I loved. The Sisters of Mercy, The Mission UK, Megadeth, King Diamond, Anthrax. Of course, bands like Led Zeppelin and Deep Purple and King Crimson. And, I have to remember all of them.
Your taste, they really run the gamut, though. I mean, you're just not kind of like, Maiden, Anthrax, this. You've sort of got, seems like a pretty wide palette of tastes.
Yeah, I also like a lot of old pop stuff and rock stuff. Dire Straits, U2, Eric Clapton stuff, Dirk and the Dominoes, Cream, The Who, and also industrial stuff like Skinny Puppy, Front 242, that's more of the EBM also, and a lot of bands like that as well, and Die Groups. Of course, also bands like Pink Floyd and Yes and Rush and Nick Cave and the Bad Seeds. I like a lot of types of music: pop, rock, alternative rock, industrial, gothic, electronic, prog rock. Oh, Fates Warning is also another band I like a lot. And Dream Theater as well. And,
we'll have to put Fates Warning off for the time being.
Okay. But yeah, a lot of bands. I get Judas Priest, and honestly, it will take hours to say all the bands that I like and what albums I like, and Jason Becker, Yngwie Malmsteen. There's a bunch. It's It's a lot. Killing Joke. I mean, you see, I'm just talking Prong. You see, everything I'm saying, I just pop up another band that I like. So
I should have warned you in advance. Probably make you get out your iPod and just kind of scroll through. We'll go through alphabetically of all the bands on there.
I don't listen to an iPod. I don't have an iPod. I listen to CDs, but I have a lot of CDs. So I would probably have to open up my CD collection, which is big. So
what do you figure? A couple thousand?
Yeah, more than a couple thousand. Well, a couple is a big number. No, I think I probably have, I don't know, 3,000, 4,000 maybe. I don't know, maybe 3,000. It's a big amount.
So how do you get involved in audio production? Did you go to school for it?
When I was with bands, I was playing with bands, I was always interested in the production and recording side. So, as a kid, you go and check out different things. You go to stores and see the gear, and you try record with people who have gear, and then I recorded some stuff, and then I went to learn audio engineering, and I learned to be an audio engineer. And then I did some live sound for bands, and I recorded some, and I did some mixing, and I worked in rehearsal studios doing live sound for the rehearsal, hooking up mics for the vocals and DIs for, maybe keyboards or bass, and miking up a kit, and, if they wanted to record to a cassette, or later on, if they had more money, to a DAT tape, or to record live to tracks, to like a DA88, or whatever it was. So I was I also to tape. I think it was like a Fostix 16 track, and I even remember one of my first recording was to a 4-track. Actually, now that I remember, it's like a song I wrote like I was a kid, and honestly, it's not the best recording. I don't even remember exactly what it was, but it was a friend who had a 4-track, and he probably did most of the technical side. I barely knew, but I think I did some stuff. I don't remember everything, but I was always involved with it, and I did a lot of live sound, and I DJ'd, and I did broadcasting, and yeah.
So would you consider yourself fairly self-taught in terms of the engineering aspect?
Well, everybody who is an engineer will tell you a lot of the knowledge is really self-taught, because you take a lot of information from the school and you can implement it to your use. But a lot of it is hands-on work, which, you sit in a session and you move mics, or you move faders, or you move yourself out of it. But I don't want to say I'm self-taught because I studied, but mastering is something that I did self-taught. I didn't learn it anywhere, and I didn't work for any mastering studio that I could learn from as an apprentice or something like that, or So my mastering skills were developed by myself. I did learn audio engineering as part of me being an audio engineer. Studying it was important. It helped me learn theory and also some hands-on work, and it taught me how to work problems. If there's problems, it taught me how to work problems as well, how to troubleshoot.
So before we jump into the mastering thing, I read that you also used to be, and you mentioned it, you used to be a radio DJ and a music journalist. What station and publications were you involved with?
With music journalism, I wrote for a few of them. One of them was called Dofek. It was an Israeli music magazine, and I was mainly writing about metal releases. And then there was an album, I think it was mostly metal, but maybe I don't remember exactly. And then there was another magazine called Metal Hammer, but it was the Israeli version of Metal Hammer. So it was Metal Hammer Israel. And there I was reviewing and interviewing musicians and albums, and I was reviewing albums that came out and interviewing bands as well. And then later on, I was part of an online webzine called alternative-zine.com. And I was doing some of the reviewing, some interviews, and even photos. So I was kind of like the second guy there. We were two people, and we added reviewers and people who wanted to contribute interviews, photos, and reviews. So I was part of that as well for most of those my activities back then.
Is that website still around?
Yes, it's not that active as before due to everybody's busy, but and I haven't contributed to it for a long time. But you can still find that website. It used to be very good for musicians to check it out because it has a lot of links to labels and bands. So when people wanted to check, labels for their bands or check other bands themselves, whatever you want, it had a lot of info in the links. So it was very useful back then. That's when things were not that developed and there were not a lot of web scenes or places to find information. But today, of course, there's so much of that that you can find. So it's not that big, what I mean? So that website was not updated for a long time. But I guess you can still find interesting pictures and reviews or interviews there. And the radio station, I was a guest DJ in some of the radio shows that were played in radios. So I was invited and I would bring CDs and play them in different radio stations, that were working at that time. Also, I had my own internet radio show when this was quite new. It was in a radio station called WFM.coil, and we had a program, a metal show called Whiplash. And it was a 2-hour show, and we would play a lot of music and also joke around and do some interviews and chat room. And that was back then, was very, new and fresh. The only ones that were doing it big time, I think, were TotalRock.com, from England.
Yep.
Maybe there was Hard Radio or one of those. I think there weren't a lot of those happening, and it was quite unique, especially that we were the only radio show in Israel back then that was internet and metal. Later on, there were others, and later on there were even shows on educational radio. And also I was a DJ at clubs. I would play metal there at a lot of gigs. I would do the DJ before the show or after the show or during the show. And also at metal club nights, you would go to a metal evening. So I was doing a lot of that.
So when and why did you come to the United States? What was sort of the catalyst for you moving from Israel over here?
I was doing mastering then already in Israel. And, it's something that I always felt that I connect best dealing with the final result and polishing it or tweaking it or making it feel in a certain way or, whatever you would call it. I came across a band that I knew before, but they changed their name, and they were a metal band, and then they changed members and changed name, and they became more of kind of like the contemporary rock, American rock, contemporary, heavy rock. And they flew to America to work with Sylvia Massey. And when they came back to Israel, I mastered some of their songs, and I liked them very much. They're good people, and I like the songs, and so I worked with them on those songs and also on a few other songs that later on they've done. And I did some other work with other acts that were not from Israel. During those years, I was working with a lot of bands that came to Israel to perform live. I was working either as a technical director of the production gig, like to get the equipment, to, do the administrative side of the technical side, like which gear I need to bring, which gear they can bring, all this gear set up, making sure the gig is running on the technical side.
Did you deal with lighting too?
Yeah, it was all the technical side. So it's either me just being the technical director of it or, technical consultant, whatever it was. If it was only before the gig, not working on the gig, then I was a consultant. If it was also during the gig, I was a technical director. Some gigs, I was also a live sound engineer for the front of house. Some of them I was monitor engineer. Some of them I was a backliner. Some of them I was all of the above. So I also made connections with some of the artists that came. And so some of them I stayed in touch with. And, that kind of opens your view of things. You're like, oh, okay, maybe I should think international and approach that. And when I was working with that band, they're called Sick Irony. They were working with Sylvia Massey. I liked their material, and I liked what Sylvia did with them. So me and Sylvia got in touch, and she suggested I come to work for her and in her studio up in Weed, California. So I moved. I finished my work in Israel. Even though I got offers to work in different companies, I said no. I'm leaving the country, and I just packed up and said, "Let's go." And I went to work for her. And I worked for her in the studio in Weed, in Radio Star Studios, 24/7. You work 24/7 there, and you meet bands, you work with them, they go, you develop your skills more and more, and you become connected more and more. And later on, my wife joined me. We weren't married back then, but we were in a relationship, and she joined me after a few months. And later on, we moved to Los Angeles to open my own facility.
So just so I got the timeline of this right, first of all, when do you move to the States initially?
2007. July 2007.
And then you opened your own mastering studio. When was that?
That was 2008. I think it was in March.
Okay. And so now turning, obviously, onto mastering completely, can we sort of backtrack a little bit, and can you explain for listeners exactly what mastering is and what a mastering engineer does?
Well, mastering is the final step before releasing the music out. It could be for an album, for an EP, for a single, for a demo, for a promo, for a video, for an MP3, for a website, for whatever release, for an ebook, for a music library, for a movie. Basically, it's taking what the mix has given. The mix is the balance of all the instruments. Okay? So you take what the mix gave you, and you improve it in a way that you make it more appealing to the listener or more connecting to it, giving the listener a deeper listening experience. It's like representing it. It's taking, what is a recording? A recording is a capture of a moment of music that was recorded, right? That's a recording. It's something that's captured. And mixing is blending the instruments. You could do that while recording, or you could do that after recording, depends on the type of recording. And mastering is taking that and giving it that final touch, giving it maybe a different color, maybe enhancing the color, maybe making it clearer, maybe making it duller, making it brighter, warmer, louder, softer, tighter, punchier, wider, harsher, edgier. You can do a lot of things to it. And that helps the listener connect to it. A mastering engineer is like a listener with control. He listens to it objectively and fresh, and can bring a new perspective to it. He can make the listener connect to it more. Even though the music already connects the listener, good mastering can improve that. And there's a lot of ways to master, and each mastering engineer likes to work in certain ways. And if you give the material to a few mastering engineers that are good, you'll get different masters that might sound good, but each one will be different, and you'll decide what you like best based on your taste.
Mm-hmm. And I think one thing that's important to point out too is that one of the big things in mastering is balancing out levels from song to song. So you don't get a CD where one song cuts your head off and the next song you can't hear and there's no treble in it or something like that.
Well, in case of an album, an EP, or a compilation, you can match the levels, or you can make them feel closer to each other. Some albums you actually want to make that high and low levels jump, because you want to make certain tracks jump out more. That's a possibility. It's a decision that you make, and you can do it if the artist wants that. Also, tone-wise, not every album you'll have the songs matched tone-wise. Some albums you want to have the songs have their own tone. Some of them you want them to kind of make them more cohesive and match them. In compilations, sometimes you want to keep them as is, just set the volume right. So you can do that. You can also do the fade-in, the fade-outs, the segues, and how the timing between the songs can be. That's also in mastering. You can think of it as you go to a movie and the movie is projected on a screen. So the mastering engineer is basically like the guy who's controlling that projector. You can make it brighter or darker. You can put the focus more to make it clearer. You can make the focus less and make it less clear and detailed. So it's about the presentation. That's basically what mastering is. It's presenting it and making it work on a big amount of playback systems, because you want that mix to sound good on most systems. And with mastering, you can achieve that more by just putting a mix through all these systems. The mastering can help balance sonic imbalances and areas that have problems that might make it inconsistent on some systems.
Now, when you master, which do you prefer? Do you like digital plugins, or do you take more of an old school approach with a lot of gear?
Well, my studio is based on gear. I have a lot of hardware gear, analog, tube, solid state, and external digital gear as well. So there's analog gear, and a lot of EQs and compressors and processors, and I also have a lot of digital gear. I also have some plugins. When I need to work with them or add them, I will if needed. But when I work on the tone of the masters, it's mostly done on the gear, unless I have to work with a certain plug. So it's mainly external, and that's why I have a lot of gear.
Do you do any mastering from reel to reel or vinyl, or is it all digital? Do people have to have it all digitally converted before you can work on it, or will you convert things from reel to reel and things like that?
Well, I personally prefer getting the songs from digital sources, like from files or digital sources like that, or because with tapes are really cool, but my studio is packed with a lot of other gear, a lot of analog gear as well, and I don't have a room for tape machines here right now, and to do all the maintenance and all that and keeping tapes. And for me, it's better to invest in the actual hardware processing gear, the analog and the digital gear. So I prefer getting the files. Also, a lot of my work is international based. I get the songs sent to me from all over the world, and it's better for me that they send it digital and online. It's cheaper than sending reel-to-reel tapes. And I prefer just to keep it that way because I can always warm up the sound if I want. I have a lot of analog gear that warms it up. Some of it actually has tape heads in it. And also, when I work, I like to have choices. And I don't try to impose the music on one specific piece of gear. I'll listen to different pieces of gear and see what naturally fits best. And if it doesn't, I'll just take it out of the equation and put something else and see if that works best. I like to find an immediate connection with the specific gear that I'm checking out for the song. And a lot of times you find out that there's things that actually work better, like stylistically or regionally, because you have like rock from here and you have rock from Europe, or like rock from Britain or France, or Swedish rock, or metal from here and metal from Sweden. So if you have different styles, they require sometimes different gear. Also the different recordings. If you have a really, really good recording, you want to keep it great as possible and not harm it. So when you have different types of gear, you can check what improves it most and what does the least harm to it. Mm-hmm. So it's important for me to really check and see. And sometimes I'll work on a project that needs to be presented in a different territory. It could be American, but it needs to be fitting the European market. So I'll go for more a European sound. And I won't impose a sound if it doesn't fit there.
What would you describe as the difference being between an American sound versus a European sound?
There's a lot of differences in different genres and also in different subgenres. In some music styles, in Europe it's a bit more tight and very detailed, less low end and less full. And then in American sound has a lot of fatness, a lot of low end. But sometimes it's kind of the opposite. Sometimes there's bands that have the American sound that is not that thick, but then you have like a British sound that is very warm, and an American sound is less. So it's really dependent on the genre and the territory, and of course the recording itself. You can record a death metal album, but your recording might sound like a heavy metal album. So you have to find how to make that death metal album sound death metal and less heavy metal, but still not impose the wrong thing.
Can you explain some of the different types of effects that you use, like compression and EQ and that kind of thing, and just sort of explain the sort of things that each effect does to the sound?
Well, every effect that you'll put will affect the sound in a coloration way, and might also affect in how the transients go. A compressor deals with the dynamics of the levels, takes the levels that pop out and compress it and takes and damps that level changes. But at the same time, a compressor can change the color of the tone as well by what type of circuit it has. If it's a tube compressor, it will sound different than a solid state compressor. And in a solid state compressor, there's different types of compression. They can change also the sound, not only the dynamics, but the actual color. If it has more detail or more soft, or if there's more transients going through, or if it has power or punch. So even a compressor can make changes to the tone, the coloration of the tone, and how open it is, or bright or dull. EQs, equalizers, are basically tone shapers. You can add and subtract certain frequencies and add highs, lower highs, add mids, lower mids, add lows, take out lows. You can combine. Every EQ is very different than the other. They might look the same, but they might not be sounding the same based on the circuit itself and the parts inside and the way that the curves are. There's limiters, and what they're doing is they're not letting the level go out above a certain range that you give it. So everything they do, they knock off a certain amount above the threshold and keep it as steady as they can in terms of not going up. Might go down, but not up. And there's different types of limiters. There are digital limiters, analog limiters. Some limiters can open up more possibilities of raising the level. Some of them are multi-bands. They can be divided to lows, mids, highs, or low mids, mids, high mids, and highs. And
so that kind of says, like, if a bass frequency keeps popping out, it's going to knock down that, but it'll allow the mids and the highs to keep getting through a little bit more. Do I have that right? Okay.
Yes, that can. So that could be on a multi-band limiter or on a multi-band compressor as well. So multi-bands can be either compressors or limiters. There's also multi-band enhancers that can do for stereo enhancement, that they're divided to multi-bands. There's also stereo enhancers, or MS configuration, which lets you do more of the mono or more of the sides, so you can change the positioning of the mix and pull up vocals or kick or pull down or move the sides wider. You can do.
Well, I think in that case too, it's important to sort of explain to listeners that usually in a mix you have usually the kick, snare, bass, and vocals sort of running down the middle, so it's in both speakers equally. And then you have usually guitars and some other effects are usually panned out, one in each speaker, one in the other one.
That's in most cases, but there are also mixes that sometimes the bass is tilted to one side a bit more, just a bit. Or I've seen mixes that have it, not exactly in straight mono. They moved them aside or added an effect on the other side, so there's a width to it. There's no one rule, but most people will put kick, snare, and vocals and bass on the center. Yes. So in MS, you can divide the mono information and the side information and decide which one will be louder, or to process each one differently, like put an EQ on the sides and put a different EQ on the center, or more compression on the center or on the side. You can decide. And you can also widen things up, but there's also a downside to widen things up because it takes some of the center out. Also having MS processing. Another option to work in mastering is clipping. If you want, you can clip the music and it gives...
Or distortion.
Yes, but it's distorting like a converter, or distorting a soft clipper, which pushes it a bit more. It kind of flattens it in a way, but it can excite certain elements of the sound, and it could be pleasing to a degree. And sometimes it can work on a lot of the music, but then it can make it fatigue a bit. And you can achieve level with clipping, of course. That's one of the ways to get level. So there are clippers, or there are mastering consoles that have gain knobs, and you can push them, and you're clipping your converters. Another processor that you have is basically a converter, which is not a processor by itself. It's more of something that sends and captures. You have a D2A, a digital to analog converter, that takes the digital information, turns it to analog, and you can run your analog chain. And there's A to D, which takes the analog and turns it to digital. And some converters have DSP in them, so you can change the sound, maybe clip it, add some level, or tape effect or tube effects. There's different enhancers that create shifting in the frequencies that makes it feel like certain frequencies pop out more or give you more bottom, like synthesis for bass, and give you low end. There's also the Sers, which are dedicated compressors that deal with the high-end information, mostly, taking off S's and cymbal sibilants. There's also dynamic EQs that can let you find a frequency that you want to compress. You can do also dynamic limiting, or DS could be also limiting the Ser. You can change also the balancing between the left and the right. Sometimes it's needed, or change a phase. And
so that's like if the left speaker seems a lot louder than the right.
Yeah, I wouldn't say left speaker. I would say more left program material.
Channel, yeah.
Yeah, left channel, yes.
Do you find usually that happens if sort of the studio's set up wrong, or the guy who mixed it sort of leaned to one side maybe and favored that, or?
It could happen because of those things, but a lot of times it's natural that certain sides will be stronger because the person who mixed wanted a bit more power in that side, which gives you, when it's not exactly balanced, it also gives you kind of like a position mix. And it's natural that it's not always on both sides at the same time. It's natural that you'll have one side louder than the other or changing in between, and one side changes with the other side. Or sometimes they'll be the same. There's no rules of that. I've worked on really good albums that had a big difference in between their left and right, and it was nice. I liked it. Didn't bother me.
What are your thoughts on the state of modern mastering and the loudness wars?
Well, a lot of times people think that compression is the problem. I don't think compression is the problem. I think level is the problem, because there was a lot of good stuff that was really compressed but sounded good because it wasn't loud. When things are loud, they move out of their sweet spot. They start to overpower. And loud masters, you can't listen to them really, really low because you won't hear anything. And then when you move just one notch or number, they start to sound good, but they're very intense. And then if you move just a bit more, they're too much already. There's not enough headroom for them to be played with. Where lower level sounding masters, you can play with the volume knob, put it really low, and it sounds good. You can raise it up, raise it up, raise it up, and it sounds good throughout a bigger, wide range of levels, of volumes. And I think they don't fatigue as much. And when something is not fatiguing, you enjoy playing it more and more. And when things are really loud, you listen to them less because it's too much for the ear at one time. So you listen to it, you get tired of it, even on a subconscious level. You heard it and you're like, wow, it's great, and then you're just not coming back to it that fast.
Well, that's the thing I find too. If I have, CDs that are really loud, I find by about the 7th or 8th song, you've really kind of backed off the volume. And you're right, it's not so much that the songs get bad, but it's just your ears are too fatigued to keep listening at something at a constant volume for such a long time.
Well, you said 7th song. That's quite a lot. Most people I know, after the 3rd song, they stop listening. Or sometimes people tell me how they loved a certain sound of an album. And then I ask them, how many songs did you hear from that album? And they'll tell me, just one. I ask them why. They're like, I don't know. So I think that loud albums, they don't give the most potential of them. They lose their impact really fast. Impact is time-based. Impact is not just on the first second. It's on the second minute as well. If you lose the impact after 10 seconds, because it was too loud and too upfront, then after a minute you're not getting more impact. It just stays the same, so it's not impact anymore, it's just constant.
Mm-hmm.
So I think it's a problem. Now, some music styles or some recordings can handle more level because the certain way they were mixed, and some just don't sound as nice when you crank them up. So when I master, I try to find the sweet spot where it sits and give that to the client. If he insists on more level, I will explain to them what I think can happen, and if they still insist on doing so, I will give it to them with higher level. But I will tell them up front if I think it will do bad or good to it, more as an information, And I prefer telling them just in case. But some of them, they'll be like, no, it's okay. I'm willing to sacrifice the dynamics and the tone for that level. And sometimes it's not a big sacrifice. Sometimes it's, just a small sacrifice, and it doesn't matter as much. And sometimes it's a small sacrifice that matters a lot. It's really case by case. Sometimes a small difference makes a big difference. And in some cases, adding another dB won't do so much damage. So it's okay. But, I try to find the sweet spot of the music, and if there's a need to make changes, I'll do them.
Now, have you ever gotten an album like, say, Death Magnetic, where it was heavily distorted and compressed before it even got in your hands? Or is that pretty rare?
No, I've gotten files that were really loud and even distorted. Yes, I've got a few of those. I don't, it's not an everyday thing I get, but I've had situations where I got a few of those. And I just did what I could. Some of them were even louder than normal loud masters. So I just, did what I could best, clean it up a bit and make it less fatiguing, and probably kept it either the same level or took it a bit, made it a bit lower in level. But it worked. It did it. It did the work that it needed. It made it easier on the ear.
How can you clean that up? Like, do you run a lot of EQ through it, or what sort of techniques can you do to make it more pleasing to the ear?
It's kind of like diverting the attention of it. Instead of you hearing those distortions and focusing on that, or focusing on how hot it is, you make it in a way that it feels less of that, and you focus on other things. It could be EQ-wise that you do, or playing with compression, or limiting, or a combination, just to kind of divert the attention from that. It's still there, but you can hear less of it. You can't take it out totally, and if you do, it's going to affect the sound. So you can't take it out without introducing some new tonal characters to it, but you can make it more pleasing or less offensive to the ear.
Now, before a session, will you sit down with the band and determine what kind of mastering will work best, dynamic, highly compressed, or whatever? Or do you usually just tend to sort of get the masters and then maybe send them several samples for them to decide on what they like best?
It depends. In most cases, I will listen, I will work on it, and I'll send a few versions for the band to check and see what they like. In other cases, I might discuss with them what type of sound they're looking for, what type of sound they have, and how we can work with it, where I can go with it. Sometimes I'll know things from beginning. Once I get the music from them, I'll know if there's a problem or not. And in other cases, I might have to start working on it and then figure out if I have certain problems to deal with. If it's something I can handle and work with and work around the problem, I'll do it and send them the masters. If I feel that there's problems that I would prefer being fixed in the mix, so I can enhance the music better instead of fixing it, then I'll tell the mixing guy or producer, can you tweak this and this? Can you make a fix here and there? And so we can make it sound better. And then in most cases, they'll do that if they can. And they'll send me a new version, and I'll master it and send it back to them to check. If they can't do it, due to scheduling or recalling it is a problem, or the band just can't reach the mixing guy, or there's no more days in the studio, then I'll work with what I have.
Can you take us through a typical session of mastering? Like what sorts of things do you try first? Do you usually start with different compressors, and then when you find one you like, you move on to EQ, or is each session really its own unique thing?
It's really, I don't want to sound too dramatic, but it's it's like a story by itself. I listen to something and I'm like trying to figure out, what does this remind me of? Or does this sound like some kind of experience I had before, or it reminds me of a certain feeling, and then I'll try to figure out what should I do with it in terms of which gear might fit, and I'll try different compressors and EQs, and there's no specific chain in terms of what's first and what's second. I just might turn one on and then the other one, and okay, this sounds good, this doesn't, okay, let's take this out, or then another one, and I'll try to play with it. Sometimes I'll start from the end to the beginning, sometimes from beginning to the end, or sometimes I'll listen to a few songs and find the one that I want to start with, or start with the first one, to keep a consistency in the album. So every project is kind of unique, and I might try different ways to work with it. Analog, digital, or digital. I would play with it and see if it's too sterile or if it's too warm, or just I think it's more about trying to capture that moment and trying to figure out. And a lot of times you find yourself going back and forth and trying again and changing until you get to that point where you say, okay, I like this vibe, let's stay with this, and then move on. And from this vibe I move on to make other tweaks and changes.
How many different pieces of gear and plugins do you think you'll run through in a typical song?
I don't know. Some projects you can use a small amount of gear. Some projects need a lot. I think that in mastering you can go 4 ways. You can do a little and it sounds like you've done a lot. You can do a little and it could sound like you just did a little. You can do a lot that sounds like you've done a lot, and you can do a lot that sounds like you've done a little. So I've done projects where I had a lot of gear in the signal chain, sometimes even 8 pieces of gear, and it did a small changes. There were small changes, so it didn't really change a lot. And I've had projects where I would put 2 pieces of gear and it would feel like it changed a lot. And of course I had projects where I had 10 pieces of gear or 8 or 7 that changed a lot as well. So there's not just one. Sometimes I use the gear for, I'll use a gear to get a certain tone, and then I add another piece of gear to add to that tone or to subtract from that tone, and then a compressor to do a certain job, and then a different compressor maybe to do another job, or put a few EQs because together they blend nice. So there's no one number, but I've done projects that had a lot of gear chained one to the other, and I had projects that were just a small amount. But with a small amount of gear, you can do a lot. You can do a lot of changes with just 1 or 2 pieces of gear, but you can do also small changes with it. And with a lot of gear, you can do small changes that are built up from one to the other.
Are there any tips that you can offer with regards to pieces of different gear? Like, for example, should EQ almost always go before compression, or should extra bass be added after limiting? Or are there any sort of, not really rules, but things you found that work most of the time?
Well, first of all, EQ is not always needed. Sometimes you can fix a problem without an EQ. Sometimes an EQ will introduce artifacts that you don't like. Same with compression. So when you connect gear and you try to work with it, try to hear when you're putting an EQ if it really adds something good or not. You can switch between EQ first and compression later, and I've done the opposite as well. Sometimes I like to have compression early on, and sometimes I like to have compression after. But there's no rule. A lot of people would like to have EQ before compression because then they can lower the bass frequencies that might trigger compression. So a lot of people will put EQ before compression. For me, there's no rule, because I just try to see what feels better for me. It's how I attach to it. I could put a compressor early on or later on. If a low frequencies will trigger the compression, then I'll have to put an EQ or a filter before to take that out. Or I can actually use a compressor that has a side chain that lets the low frequencies, not interfere with the detector unit of it, and it will bypass that low end from the detector circuit. so it won't trigger it. So I can do that with a compressor that has it. It's a high pass sidechain filter, and some compressors have that. Some call it contour, some call it high pass, some call it just low cut, whatever. But if you want to have more control, if you put an EQ before a compressor, there's more flexibility in how the compressor will react to the sound, because you can cut the lows or boost highs or do whatever you want. So it's easier to work that way if you really want to have more control. But there's no rule. You can always put a compressor before or after, wherever you want. But it's very common you'll find it before.
Yeah. Do you do any teaching about mastering? Like, there's 2 short video clips online of a masterclass series where you explain some of your techniques, but have you done any other teaching outside of that?
Besides those 2 clips that you mentioned that are on mymasterclass.com, I've done a lot of mastering clinics in various schools, such as the Musicians Institute and LA Recording School, and which was later on LA Film School as well. And also at SAE, I've done kind of external clinics. Sometimes it's companies that hired me to do it. I've done it ASCAP Expo. I've done it AES, some seminars. Some of the companies hired me to either do or be part of a panel or presentations. I've done some outside the country. Went outside the country and did it at various schools and colleges. So mastering clinics is something I do a lot, and a lot of times I've done interviews and also Skype classes with schools where they show me and they have Q&A with me. So yeah, it's something that I do a lot.
Okay, so I guess now we can talk about a lot of the bands and albums that you've mastered over the years. One of the, the band I initially learned about you from was Rob Halford's stuff. And you've done a lot of his stuff. Have you sort of become his sort of go-to mastering engineer at this point?
Well, Rob now is back in Judas Priest, so I don't know. He's doing mainly Priest now, but back then we started working together. I mastered for Roy Z, the producer and mixer. He's the guy who produced and mixed and engineered. And the first project we did was a remastering the second Fight album, which is called A Small Deadly Space. And I think it's called, is that Small Deadly Space? That's what it's called?
Yeah.
What happened is that they were remixing and remastering those albums. And I did the second one. Roy remixed it and I remastered it. I mastered the remix, of course, so that's mastered it. And it came out in digital format through the record labels, through Halford's label, Metal Gods. And also it came out in a box set with 3 more CDs, which was, one was War of World, the other one is Small Deadly Space, and then there was a EP and a video or something. It was called Into the Pit.
Oh, okay, yep.
But the box set. So the Small Deadly Space is what I did. And I did also some other songs from different recordings that they had, which were probably sold more as digital downloads. And later on, I did some, there was some audio consulting I did for Rock in Rio DVD. And there was also a stage mix master there that there was like an additional track that I mastered that was there. Then Rock in Rio was remastered for Blu-ray. So I did the whole Rock in Rio remastering for Blu-ray, and there was Live Insurrection in 5.1 remastering that I did there as well.
Oh, that's been done in 5.1.
Yeah, that's it.
Very, very cool. Okay, I gotta seek that. That's one of my favorite live records. I love that one.
So that's in the Blu-ray. So Rock in Rio and the Blu-ray has that. And then later on, I did the album Winter Songs. I don't remember if Rock in Rio was before Winter Songs or either one. I did Winter Songs. That was the studio album. That was Halford 3. And then later on, I did Halford 4, studio album. And then I did Live in Anaheim, which came out in CD and DVD. And there are different mixes and different masters. The CD has a different sound, both in mixing and also the mastering. It's very different than the DVD version. The DVD version, even though it has a stereo version mastering, it's different than the CD version. So if you're a collector of those, have both. They sound different. So the CD, the double CD thing, it sounds different than the actual DVD. And later on, I did another Halford, which was live in Japan. I forgot the name of the venue. And that also came out in CD and in DVD, and it's different mixes and different masters. So the DVD has a 5.1 and a stereo, and they sound different than the actual CD that is only stereo. I think that's most of it. And so I did quite a few, and I did some stuff that came out in different additional bonus tracks and singles. So I did quite a few for Halford. It was a good project. I enjoyed. The songs were good, and the live stuff also had some Judas Priest songs in it, so it was cool. I enjoyed.
One of the first major bands that I see you working with is Yngwie Malmsteen. Was he or any of the other band members present for that session when you mastered it?
No, Roy Z mixed that album, and Roy was with him, working with him back in the studio, and the songs were sent to me, and I was working on them and sent them back, and it was a collaborative working. Roy sent me the songs, I worked on them, I sent back. If he had wanted to make changes or something, he would tell me, or so that was done in distant working. I was in LA and Yngwie is in Miami. So
how many artists typically come into a mastering session, or is it really none at all?
I have some clients that come in for attended sessions. I work with some people that were either during the whole process, or some of them just came in for the editing, the sequencing of it. They wanted to be, give me pointers of where they want the songs to move from one to the other. Like the band Cynic, I worked with them on their 3 latest releases, Retraced, Carbon-Based Anatomy, and the new one. And with them, I always worked on the editing of it with them. They wanted to tell me where they want me to make changes, and I'm cool with that because, they like building their album in a certain way, and I can work with them that way and make that album exactly how they want it.
I also see, speaking of artists who come into a mastering session, I've seen a video of you getting interviewed by Dave Ellefson of Megadeth. And was he around for what was that record? That was F5, right?
Yeah, that was F5's second album called The Reckoning. And it was a really cool project to work on. The band members are really nice people. And Dave, of course, he's a great guy. And we worked on that album, and there were 2 versions of it. One had a bonus track that was actually nailed to the gun.
On F5?
Yeah, on the European version. Yeah.
Really?
Yeah, I don't have a copy
seek that
here, but yeah, they had. And it's funny because it was just after I was working on Fight. Even though I didn't do the one with Nailed to the Gun, I did the one after that. But working on a band that had Nailed to the Gun in it as a cover, it was cool, and they were really nice to work with. And on that album, Jimmy DeGrasso played drums, and it's a very good album. F5 The Reckoning. It's has that vibe and feel of what like albums like Countdown to Extinction had, and it's kind of feel of it. And also bands like Annihilator had during the 90s time and era.
Mm-hmm.
It's not outdated or something. It's, you can play it and say, oh, it feels good, it sounds cool, it's nice. And the musicianship was great. They play really well.
Other than it seems like you do a lot of stuff with Roy Z, are there any other engineers who you work really closely with?
Yes, Billy Sherwood, me and him work together a lot. We've done 14 albums.
Oh.
Yes, in the past a year and a bit. I've worked with a lot of engineers. Some of them, have a lot of projects coming in. Some of them have, more spread out, once here, once there. Sometimes the engineers can't choose who will master it. Sometimes the producer chooses, sometimes the management, sometimes the artist. So if the producer can send it to me, great. If not, it's not in my control. Or sometimes it's in the producer's or mixer's control, and sometimes it's out of their control. So some of them work with me for a long time, and I'll probably do a big amount of their work, unless the management asks for something else, or the artist insists on something else, or their position in the project has changed.
Do you ever experience goosebumps or have to pinch yourself when you're mastering major bands like Sepultura, Dokken, Halford, Lita Ford, Anvil, Angra, some of these just major bands? Do you ever just sort of sit there and think, how did I ever get to this point where I'm working with some of these just incredibly huge and popular bands?
I get excited from most of the projects I'm working on because I like what I'm doing and I like putting something out there. I like bringing something to the table. If I get a project, each project I get to work with, I enjoy listening to and trying to bring something out of it for me, for my side, Some projects you enjoy more because you like the music more. Some projects you enjoy because you like the people involved. Sometimes it's a combination of both the people and the music. Of course, you get excited when you work with artists that you grew up on and you love their music. I admit, when I get something to work on that I know who the artist is and I like their music, it's exciting and, it's fun, you feel good. Hopefully, if you deliver good, that's even great. And when the band tells you they love how it sounds, then that's even better. So, yeah. That's
what are some of your favorite albums you've mastered, either musically or from a production standpoint?
Fate's Warning, Darkness in a Different Light, and the new Cynic album that's coming out. Also, the Halford stuff, I'm very proud of it, very happy with it. Believer, I like that one. I did a Lana Lane album, which I think sounds great. I like it. The Prague Collective, the first Prague Collective album, and the second one, which is coming out soon, I guess. I'm really happy with it. Armored Saint, La Raza.
Oh, great record.
Yeah. Sepultura Kairos. Yeah, I'm proud of that album. I think the Yngwie album I did has great music on it. Angra, Aqua, I'm happy with that album as well.
Yeah, that was a good record.
A lot of the Prague stuff I did, I'm really happy with. Fusion Syndicate, the William Shatner album I've done.
Oh, that's right, you did Shatner too. I completely forgot about that.
Ponder the Mystery, I'm happy with that.
Now that I don't think that's out. Is that more of a metal album or how's
it's a prog album with him.
Oh, really?
Yeah. It's a progressive rock album with a lot of guest musicians and spoken word by him. I've done Nectar Time Machine, I think came out good. There's a band called Doth, which I did their album. It's a self-titled album. I'm really happy with that. It sounds very good, I think. I did a Therion album called The Miskolc Experience. It's a...
Oh, cool. You did that one.
Yeah, it's a DVD and 2 albums. I did the audio CDs for it, not the DVD itself. And
okay.
But so it comes with 2 CDs. I like that. I think it was a good one. And, of course, the Fight thing, that the remasters... Oh, Trepon Impal, a French band, French industrial band. I've done Word Machine from 2008 and Survival Sounds from 2012. They sound very good. Another good one that I remember now is Antimatter. I did the latest one. It's called Fear of a Unique Identity. I did an EP for Adrenaline Mob, a 5-track EP.
Oh, you've done stuff for them?
Yeah, the first EP. It's not the album. It's what came first.
Oh, okay.
I think it sounds cool. And the Dokken album I did. But, I mean, there's a bunch of stuff. I don't remember everything now. Walter Trout, I did 2 of his latest albums. And the band Film, which is PHILM. It's Dave Lombardo's band. The album's called Harmonic. I think it sounds nice. And I did Symphonia in Paradisium.
Oh, nice.
I
great
think
band.
that album sounds great. I don't...
That's part of the problem with mastering too, is you only spend so much time with the music. It's not like you're in for 3 months with a band,
Well, I've done albums that took 3 months, with revisions and new mixes coming in, and I've done a lot of those albums that took a longer time than expected. So, it's not like being in the studio with the band, but some of them do take time. And Necromantics, that's a cool album that I've done. What Happens in Hell Stays in Hell. And the Cynic stuff I've done, I really like. Anvil, Hope in Hell, I like how it sounds. It fits, it works, it's good.
Yeah, Bob Marlette, he does great work too.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I did the new one, only the new one, Hope in Hell. Oh, Nightmare, a French band called Nightmare.
Oh, the Cosmovision remaster.
That's a remaster I did, and I also did The Burden of God, which is the newest album they had.
Oh, you did the new record too.
It's the latest one they had. I think it's from a year and a half ago or something like that.
Something like that, yeah.
Yeah, and that's
yeah, great band.
And I did Remove Silence. It's a band from Brazil. They sound good as well. There was a band called Nine Chambers with Vinny Appice and Ed Mendel and Greg Hampton, and I did Anna Cruz's. I did remasters for the first two albums.
Oh, nice.
It's called Hindsight. And Stork, which is a band with Thomas Lang and Shane Gibson. That's great stuff there. And I just don't remember everything. Matter Mortem, a doom metal band from, I think, Norway. I did Seven the Hard Way. That's Tony McAlpine, Virgil Donati, and Mark Bowles. Lillian Axe I did. Sad Day on Planet Earth. It was nice. Yeah, I don't remember all of them, so...
So one of the most recent records that you've mastered, and we briefly mentioned, was the new Fates Warning. Were you a big fan of Fates Warning going into the session?
Oh, yeah. I love albums like Parallels and Perfect Symmetry and Inside Out. And, there's two members of the current Fates Warning that I actually worked with before. Joey Vera, I worked with him on Armored Saint. And Bobby Zerzambek, he's in Halford. So, and of course, I love they're a unique band. Fates Warning is one of those bands that a lot of bands are influenced by them, and those that don't know them are still influenced by them because they're influenced by bands that are influenced by them. So, I like their music, and I think maybe because I like their music and I know their music and I know their style, I think it was a perfect connection for me and for them because I understood what they're doing, and I was working with Jim, and Jim produced the album, and so it was a very good communications, and so everything they needed I could accommodate. So yeah, I'm very proud of that album.
Did all of you sort of go into the mindset, because the track I've heard sounds incredibly dynamic? Did you guys go in with that mindset of we're going to make something a little bit more old school and dynamic sounding?
I don't approach level as old school. I approach level as what do we get from it? Do we need to sacrifice level to achieve something that will be better or not? If it's not adding anything to it, there's no need to add that level unless somebody insists. So I went with an idea that let's just make those tracks work best and not just try to impose a level to compete with other things out there. I didn't look at it as old school. For me, level, you can say level dictates an era, but there's albums that are loud without a specific era. There's albums that you'll play today that were done 20 years ago and they're still loud because it worked on them. It could work, it sounded fine. So I didn't go by let's do old school. I just went by, let's make it sound great. And if adding more level takes off that nice sound, then why should we make it loud? So it's not about, let's make a loud album. Let's make a great sounding album. Or let's make it the best that we can. Also, the Armored Saint album, La Raza, it's not loud, it's dynamic.
Yeah, very dynamic.
Yeah, and till today, people tell me they love it. They love the dynamics. Even the Doth album that we mentioned, Doth, the self-title, it's the last one, the latest one, the last one that was out. That's very dynamic, especially for that type of music, technical death metal. It's very dynamic, and you can hear all the details in it. So I'm not looking for, let's go old school. I'm looking for, let's make it great.
So we've mentioned new William Shatner. We just talked about Fates Warning. What are some other new albums that you've mastered recently? Or anything that you have in the pipeline, perhaps?
Well, the Cynic album is coming out in 2014, so that's going to be, later on. I did some work with, various artists from all over the world. So there's projects from Brazil, there's projects from Italy, there's projects from France. It's kind of hard to say where everything is, but there's some. I'm trying to figure out, what. A lot of them are independent bands, very talented people. I never know when the albums come out. Some projects take a year to come out. Some take less. So I really don't know right now. There's another prog collective album coming out that I've done, and there's a lot of single. There's a cool band called the Vampire Bats. It's different styles of music. Some of them are more edginess. Some edgy rock. Some of it is like pop rock. There's a band called Stork that I mentioned before. They have a second album that I've done that sounds great. They added a female singer to them. It's Shane Gibson and Thomas Lang.
Oh, nice.
So it's really good people involved.
Yeah, Lang's a hell of a drummer.
Yeah. I've done more than a few albums with him. Either it was Schwarzenegger when he was part of the band, either his solo albums with other people, or Stork. Another band that I did, there's a single, Noise Revolution. It's Wayne Static and DMC from Ron DMC. It's a single. It's supposed to come.
Oh, neat.
I did the Nectar album. I did that. It's coming out already. I did a Circa live album. It's nice. It's prog rock stuff. There's a black metal band called Inquisition that's coming out, I think, soon. There's a band from Latvia called Relic Seed. Very cool band. They're like, have that 90s thrash speed. Really nice. Good band. And there's a death metal band that I work with that is called Warfather. It's Steve Tucker, who used to be in Morbid Angel.
Oh, okay.
There's a band called Arrhythmia.
Arrhythmia?
Yeah, it's an EP. I don't know when it's coming out. Billy from Biohazard produced it. There's a band called Riding Shotgun that I did an EP for them years ago, and now I did a new one that Gilby Clark produced and mixed.
Oh, cool.
So there's quite a few. I just don't, I don't know when anything is coming out till it's coming out.
Yeah.
So yeah, there's a bunch of stuff. A new Trepon Impal remixes album. There's a lot. I just don't remember all of them, and I don't know when they're coming out.
So is there any other Maor Appelbaum news that we should be aware of, or anything else that you want to plug?
Well, I have a website, www.maorAppelbaum.com. My name is spelled Appel, Appelbaum. So if people are looking and they don't find me, it's probably from that. But, another band I recommend checking. I forgot. The band Driver. I did 2 albums with them. One was Sons of Thunder and one was Countdown. And it's...
Oh, that's the hard rock band, right?
Yeah, hard rock, heavy metal. Yeah.
Great band, yep.
And Rob Rock and Roy Z. And so that's something I recommend checking out. Yeah, there's a bunch of stuff. I really recommend to people that are recording, have your stuff professionally mastered. It's going to make a difference. And try to, get in touch with mastering people and ask them, and see who fits you. But it's important. It helps. It makes a difference. And it's part of making an album or a single or an EP or a demo. It can help. I've mastered demos for bands you won't believe I've mastered, and sometimes, it helps that demo be heard better. So I do recommend. And just so that people know, I not only do metal. We mentioned metal albums, but I do a lot of other styles. I've done world music, hip-hop, punk, rock, alternative rock, jazz, blues, country, industrial, gothic, all types of metal, all types of rock, singer-songwriter, all these genres. Latin, dance, electro, techno, house, cinematic. I work on all styles, and I don't try to impose one tone. So every project or master that you hear that I've done will sound different.
All right, Maor. Well, thank you so much for taking the time out to do this, eh?
You're welcome. Thank you. I appreciate that.
All right, yeah. Well, take it easy, eh?
Okay, you too, man, and keep in touch.
Yep, same here.
Cheers.
All right, have a good one.
Bye.